The golden light of the setting sun caught the tip of Beatrice Montgomery's knife as it dug into the bark of the old cottonwood tree, sending amber reflections dancing across her determined face. She didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats until they were nearly upon her, too focused on carving the delicate curve of the letter M into the weathered trunk. Wyoming Territory, 1876, had not been kind to 23-year-old Beatrice. The homestead she'd inherited after her father's passing 6 months ago teetered on the edge of ruin, and the memories etched into every corner of the property haunted her waking hours. This tree, standing sentinel at the edge of their land, had been her refuge since childhood. Today she was leaving her mark upon it, perhaps for the final time. "Mighty fine handiwork you got there, madam," a deep voice called from behind her. Beatrice spun around, nearly dropping her knife. A tall man sat atop a chestnut stallion, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Dust from the trail clung to his denim pants and cotton shirt, telling the story of a long journey. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said, dismounting with the easy grace of someone who'd spent his life in the saddle. "Samuel Reeves." He tipped his hat. "Just passing through to Laramie." Beatrice tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, suddenly conscious of her work-worn dress and the dirt surely smudged across her cheeks. "Beatrice Montgomery, this is my land you're passing through, Mr. Reeves." His eyes, blue as the Wyoming sky, crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "My apologies for the trespass, Miss Montgomery." He gestured toward the tree. "May I ask what you're carving there?" Beatrice hesitated, then stepped aside to reveal her handiwork. "Just my initials. Something to remember me by, I suppose." The letters BM were etched deeply into the bark, the work of an hour's careful attention. Samuel stepped closer to inspect her carving, the scent of leather and open plains following him. He ran his fingers over the letters, his touch reverent against the bark. "Make room for mine," he asked, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Beatrice blinked in surprise. "I beg your pardon." "Well, seems to me a tree like this should collect stories," Samuel replied, eyes twinkling with amusement. "And I reckon our meeting might be one worth remembering." "You're mighty presumptuous, Mr. Reeves," Beatrice said, though she couldn't help the smile that tugged at her lips. "I don't make a habit of carving strangers' initials alongside my own." "Then I'll just have to ensure I don't remain a stranger," he replied, leaning against the tree trunk with an easy confidence. "I've been riding 3 days straight from Colorado Territory. Might a weary traveler trouble you for some water before continuing on?" Something about his open expression made Beatrice lower her guard slightly. "I suppose that would be the Christian thing to do." She nodded toward the path leading to her homestead. "The house is just beyond that rise. There's a well in the yard." As they walked side by side, Samuel leading his horse by the reins, Beatrice found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. His face was tanned from long days under the sun, with laugh lines etched around his eyes. Despite his youth, she guessed him to be no more than 30. He moved with purpose, each step deliberate yet relaxed. "You mentioned Laramie," Beatrice said, breaking the silence. "What business brings you that way?" "Looking for work, mainly," Samuel replied. "I've been hiring out as a ranch hand these past few years." "Word is the Collins spread is looking for experienced men." Beatrice nodded. "The Circle C. They're good people. Fair employers from what I hear." The homestead came into view as they crested the small hill, a modest cabin with a barn and corral behind it. Chickens pecked at the dirt in the yard, and a tired-looking milk cow watched them approach with disinterest. "It's not much," Beatrice said, suddenly self-conscious of the sagging porch and weathered walls that needed mending. "Looks like heaven after sleeping under the stars for weeks," Samuel replied with genuine appreciation. "You live here alone, Miss Montgomery?" The question held no impropriety, just simple curiosity, but Beatrice stiffened nonetheless. "Since my father passed this winter. My brother Daniel joined the cavalry last year. He writes when he can." Samuel nodded solemnly. "My condolences about your father. They reached the well, and Beatrice drew up a bucket of cool water. Samuel removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. He drank deeply, water dripping down his chin. "Much obliged," he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Best water I've tasted in days." "The underground spring feeds it year-round," Beatrice explained, allowing a note of pride to enter her voice. "Even in the driest summers, it never runs dry." Samuel filled his canteen, then turned to study the property more carefully. His gaze lingered on the broken fence posts and untended fields. "Running a place like this alone is no small feat," he observed. Beatrice lifted her chin. "I manage." "I'm sure you do," he replied, no hint of condescension in his tone. "Still, there's always more work on a homestead than hours in the day, even with two strong backs." Before Beatrice could respond, the distant sound of approaching riders caught their attention. 3 men on horseback were coming up the main trail, riding hard. "You expecting company?" Samuel asked, his posture subtly shifting as he moved to stand between Beatrice and the approaching riders. "No," she replied, her hand instinctively reaching for the knife still in her pocket. "And those aren't neighbors." The riders slowed as they approached the yard, their expressions making it clear this wasn't a social call. The leader, a heavy-set man with a gray-streaked beard, pulled his horse to a stop and spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "Well, if it ain't the Montgomery girl," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Been wondering when we'd catch you at home." "Mr. Hargrove," Beatrice acknowledged stiffly. "This is private property." Hargrove laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. "That's actually what I came to discuss, girl, this property and the matter of your overdue payments to the bank." Beatrice's stomach knotted. "I have until the end of the month," Hargrove corrected with a cruel smile. "Banks decided to call in the note early, times being what they are." "They can't do that," Beatrice protested, even as doubt crept into her voice. "Paper says different," Hargrove replied, patting his breast pocket. "I've bought the note from the bank, seeing as they were eager to get it off their books. Being a generous sort, I'm willing to give you until tomorrow noon to clear out." Samuel stepped forward. "Seems mighty convenient for you, mister, and mighty sudden for the lady." Hargrove's eyes narrowed as he seemed to notice Samuel for the first time. "Don't believe we've been introduced, Cowboy. This here's a private matter." "Samuel Reeves," he replied evenly. "Just passing through and happened to notice what sounds like a man trying to swindle a woman out of her rightful property." The 2 men flanking Hargrove shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward their sidearms. "Best mind your own business, Reeves," Hargrove warned. "Less you want trouble." "Funny thing about trouble," Samuel replied, his voice calm but his eyes hard. "I've never much cared for those who bring it to folks who don't deserve it." Tension crackled in the air like summer lightning. Beatrice moved to stand beside Samuel, her heart hammering but her voice steady. "I'll need to see those papers, Mr. Hargrove. And I'll be consulting with Judge Wilson before I make any decisions about my family's land." Hargrove's face darkened. "Judge Wilson's 3 days' ride from here. My men and I will be back tomorrow at noon." He gathered his reins. "Choose wisely about what side you're on, stranger. The Montgomery place is going to be mine one way or another." With that, he wheeled his horse around, his men following suit. They galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. When they were out of earshot, Beatrice released a shaky breath. "That man has been trying to piece together a cattle empire for years. Our land controls access to the creek that runs through the valley." Samuel watched the retreating riders thoughtfully. "Is there truth to what he said about the loan?" Beatrice nodded reluctantly. "Father borrowed against the property last year after the drought killed most of our crops. I've been making payments, but it's been difficult." She squared her shoulders. "But the terms were clear payment in full by the end of the month or smaller payments with interest until then." "Then what Hargrove is doing isn't legal," Samuel concluded. "You're right to want to speak with the judge." Beatrice rubbed her temples, a headache beginning to form. "But Hargrove was also right about one thing. Judge Wilson is 3 days' ride from here, and they're coming back tomorrow." Samuel was quiet for a moment, then turned to face her directly. "Miss Montgomery, I know we've just met, but I'd like to help if you'll allow it." "Why would you?" Beatrice asked, genuine confusion in her voice. "You don't know me." A slow smile spread across Samuel's face. "Let's just say I've got a particular dislike for men who use their power to bully others. Besides," he added with a wink, "I still want my initials on that tree." Despite everything, Beatrice found herself laughing. "Mr. Reeves, you are certainly not what I expected when I started carving this morning." "Life rarely gives us what we expect," he replied. "Often gives us what we need instead." As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, bathing the land in golden light, Beatrice made a decision. "There's stew on the stove and the barn has clean hay for your horse. If you're truly offering help, I'd be a fool to refuse it." Samuel tipped his hat. "Yes, madam, I believe this is the beginning of an interesting partnership." Neither of them could have guessed just how prophetic those words would prove to be. Beatrice awoke before dawn, the familiar sounds of the homestead greeting her, the distant lowing of the milk cow, the rustle of chickens stirring in their coop. For a moment, everything felt as it always had, until memory flooded back. Hargrove's threats, the impending noon deadline, and the stranger sleeping in her barn. She dressed quickly in a simple blue work dress and pulled her hair into a practical bun. The kitchen stove was cold, and she set about building a fire, the familiar routine calming her nerves. As water began to heat for coffee, she heard footsteps on the porch. "Good morning," Samuel called softly through the screen door. "May I come in?" Beatrice motioned him inside. "You're up early." "Old habits," he replied with a shrug. "Fed and watered my horse, checked your fences on the north side. You've got a section down near the creek." "I know," Beatrice sighed. "It's on a list of repairs longer than my arm." Samuel hung his hat on a peg by the door. "I took the liberty of straightening it some. Not a permanent fix, but it'll hold for now." Beatrice paused in measuring coffee grounds. "You didn't have to do that." "Seemed like a fair trade for the barn roof over my head," he replied. "Coffee smells promising." They settled into a surprisingly comfortable routine, Beatrice frying salt pork and eggs while Samuel sliced bread she'd baked 2 days earlier. They ate at the small kitchen table, discussing their options as sunlight gradually filled the room. "So Hargrove wants your land for the water access," Samuel summarized. "Have you considered selling part of it? Maybe the section he needs most?" Beatrice shook her head firmly. "This land has been in my family for 20 years. My father built this house with his own hands when he married my mother. She's buried on the hill behind the orchard." Her voice softened. "I can't sell any of it, especially not to a man like Hargrove." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "Then we need to verify whether he truly owns your loan." "Do you have a copy of the original agreement with the bank?" "In my father's desk," Beatrice confirmed. "But even if what Hargrove is doing isn't strictly legal, he's got friends in town. And guns," she added grimly. "So do we," Samuel replied. At Beatrice's raised eyebrow, he clarified, "Have friends, I mean. Or at least I do. I wasn't entirely truthful yesterday about just passing through." Beatrice stiffened. "What do you mean?" "I came this way because a friend in Denver mentioned trouble brewing with Hargrove. He's been pulling this same scheme across 3 counties, forcing small ranchers and homesteaders out, then consolidating the land." Samuel leaned forward. "I used to be a deputy marshal out of Colorado Territory, left the badge behind 2 years ago, but not the instincts." "So you knew who I was when you stopped by that tree?" Beatrice asked, a note of accusation in her voice. Samuel shook his head. "No, madam, that was pure chance. I was planning to continue to town, gather information before approaching any of Hargrove's potential victims. Finding you carving that tree was unexpected." Beatrice studied him for a long moment, weighing his words against the sincerity in his eyes. "And your interest in Hargrove, professional at first," Samuel admitted. "The man I worked for in Denver lost land to him last year. But now." His gaze met hers directly. "Now it's personal." The intensity in his blue eyes sent a flutter through Beatrice's chest that had nothing to do with fear. She looked away first. "We have until noon," she said, rising to clear the dishes. "What do you propose we do?" Samuel stood as well, taking his plate to the wash basin. "First, I need to send a message to some friends who might be able to help. Is there someone in town you trust who could deliver it?" "The blacksmith's son, Charlie," Beatrice suggested. "He's a good boy, fast on a horse." "Perfect," Samuel nodded. "Then we need to prepare for Hargrove's return. He'll expect you to be alone and frightened." A spark of defiance lit in Beatrice's eyes. "Then he'll be sorely disappointed." They spent the morning in purposeful activity. Samuel wrote his message and Beatrice sent one of her ranch hands, a loyal teenager named Charlie, galloping toward town with it. Meanwhile, they gathered what weapons they had: Beatrice's father's old rifle, her own smaller pistol that she kept for protection, and Samuel's Colt revolver and Winchester rifle. Samuel inspected the property carefully, noting defensible positions and potential vulnerabilities. Beatrice watched him move with the practiced eye of someone trained to assess tactical situations and found herself grateful for his experience. "Your father chose well when he built here," Samuel commented as they stood on the porch, surveying the approach to the house. "Good sight lines, high ground at the back if retreat becomes necessary. He fought in the war," Beatrice explained. "Said he'd had enough of being caught unaware." As the sun climbed toward its zenith, they made final preparations. Beatrice changed into a more practical outfit: trousers that had belonged to her brother and a loose shirt better suited for what might come. When Samuel raised an eyebrow at her attire, she merely shrugged. "Can't very well defend my home in skirts, can I?" A smile tugged at his lips. "No, madam, I don't suppose you can." They were ready well before noon, positioned on the porch with clear views of the approaching road. The minutes ticked by in tense silence. "Tell me something," Beatrice said suddenly, needing distraction from the waiting. "If you're no longer a deputy marshal, what were you really doing heading to Laramie?" Samuel shifted, adjusting his rifle across his lap. "Truth is, I've been drifting this past year. After leaving the marshal service, I tried my hand at various things: ranch work mostly, some scouting for wagon trains. Nothing felt right." "What did you do before becoming a lawman?" she asked. "Grew up on a ranch not unlike this one, over in Nebraska Territory," he replied. "My father died when I was 16. By 20, I'd lost the ranch to taxes and poor management, ended up with a badge more by accident than design. And now," Samuel's gaze drifted to the distant hills, "now I'm looking for something that feels like purpose again." He turned to her with a small smile. "Maybe even a tree to carve my initials into." Before Beatrice could respond, the sound of approaching horses reached them. She gripped her father's rifle tighter, heart pounding against her ribs. "Remember," Samuel said quietly, "let me do the talking at first. We want to see what papers he actually has." Hargrove arrived with not 3 men this time, but 5. They spread out in a loose semicircle before the house, hands resting near their weapons. Hargrove himself rode forward, a smug smile beneath his mustache. "Noon, as promised," he called. "I see you've decided to make this difficult, Miss Montgomery." Samuel rose to his feet, rifle held casually but visibly. "Afternoon, Hargrove. Before this goes any further, we'd like to see those bank papers you mentioned yesterday." Hargrove's eyes narrowed. "Still here, are you? Thought you might have gained some sense overnight." "The papers," Samuel repeated firmly. With exaggerated patience, Hargrove reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. "Not that it matters, but here's your proof." He held it up without offering to hand it over. "Now, Miss Montgomery, I suggest you start gathering your belongings. My men are eager to begin improvements on my new property." Beatrice stood, joining Samuel on the edge of the porch. "I'm not going anywhere, Mr. Hargrove. That loan isn't due for 2 more weeks, and the bank had no right to sell it to you without notifying me first." "Banking can be such a complicated business," Hargrove replied with mock sympathy. "Especially for a woman trying to manage on her own. But the fact remains, I hold your debt now and I'm calling it due." Samuel took a step forward. "I'd like a closer look at that document." "I bet you would," Hargrove sneered. "Unfortunately, my patience is wearing thin. Boys," he called to his men, "help Miss Montgomery pack her personal items. Anything she leaves behind becomes property of the new owner." Two of Hargrove's men dismounted and started toward the house. Samuel raised his rifle, not aiming directly at them but making his intention clear. "That's far enough," he warned. The men halted, looking to Hargrove for direction. The atmosphere crackled with tension. "You're outnumbered, Reeves," Hargrove pointed out. "Don't be a fool." "Wouldn't be the first time I've been called that," Samuel replied evenly, "but I still want to see those papers up close." Hargrove's face darkened with anger. "This is your final warning. Clear out now, or my men will remove you one way or another." The standoff might have erupted into violence then and there, if not for the sound of approaching riders from the direction of town. All heads turned to see a group of horsemen approaching at a gallop. "Looks like we have more company," Samuel observed, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. As the riders drew closer, Beatrice could make out 5 men, and at their head, the unmistakable figure of Judge Wilson himself, his white beard and black hat visible even at a distance. Hargrove cursed under his breath. "What's the meaning of this?" The newcomers pulled up alongside Hargrove's men, effectively surrounding them. Judge Wilson, a formidable figure despite his 60 years, fixed Hargrove with a stern gaze. "Franklin Hargrove," he said, his voice carrying the authority of his office. "I received a most disturbing message this morning about your activities." "Judge Wilson," Hargrove replied, attempting to recover his composure. "This is a simple matter of debt collection. I've purchased Miss Montgomery's loan from the bank, all legal and proper." "Is that so?" The judge extended his hand. "I'd like to examine these supposedly legal papers." Reluctantly, Hargrove handed over the document. Judge Wilson adjusted his spectacles and read carefully, his expression growing stormier by the moment. "This document," he finally said, "appears to be a forgery, Hargrove. The bank president's signature doesn't match the one I verified just this morning before riding out here." He folded the paper and tucked it into his coat pocket. "Moreover, I've received complaints from 3 other property owners about similar tactics from you and your men." Hargrove's face flushed with anger. "You can't prove anything, Wilson." "Perhaps not conclusively at this moment," the judge conceded. "But I can certainly investigate, and while that investigation proceeds, Miss Montgomery's property remains hers." He nodded toward the men who accompanied him. "Sheriff Donnelly has agreed to ensure that fact is respected." The sheriff, a weathered man with a salt and pepper mustache, touched the brim of his hat toward Beatrice. "Madam." Hargrove looked from the judge to the sheriff, then to his surrounded men, calculating his options. Finally, he gathered his reins with a jerk. "This isn't over," he growled. "For today it is," Judge Wilson replied firmly. "I suggest you return to town, Hargrove. We have matters to discuss regarding these complaints." For a tense moment, it seemed Hargrove might resist, but self-preservation won out. He signaled to his men, and they slowly backed their horses away before turning to ride off. Only when they had disappeared down the road did Beatrice realize she'd been holding her breath. She exhaled shakily, lowering her rifle. "Thank you, Judge Wilson," she said. "Your timing couldn't have been better." The judge dismounted with a grunt, his bones clearly protesting the long ride. "Don't thank me, young lady, thank your friend here," he nodded toward Samuel. His message was most convincing, especially coming through my former colleague from the Colorado Territory courts. Samuel stepped forward to shake the judge's hand. "I appreciate you acting so quickly, Your Honor. Fraud and intimidation have no place in my jurisdiction," Wilson replied firmly. "Though I suspect Hargrove won't give up so easily. He's invested too much in his land-grabbing scheme." The sheriff joined them on the porch. "We'll keep an eye on him, Miss Montgomery, but it might be wise to have someone stay with you for a while, just as a precaution." Beatrice glanced at Samuel, a question in her eyes. "I believe I can assist with that, Sheriff," Samuel said, meeting Beatrice's gaze. If Miss Montgomery has no objection, a slow smile spread across her face. None whatsoever. As Judge Wilson and his party prepared to leave, having accepted Beatrice's offer of coffee and her heartfelt thanks, Samuel pulled the judge aside for a private word. "You think this will truly stop Hargrove?" he asked quietly. The older man sighed. "Temporarily, at least. I've sent telegrams to banks in neighboring counties warning them about his schemes, but men like Hargrove rarely abandon their ambitions entirely." He studied Samuel's face. "You're planning to stay on, then, for as long as I'm needed," Samuel confirmed. The judge nodded thoughtfully. "The Montgomery place could use a good man, and the lady seems amenable to your presence." Samuel felt a flush creep up his neck. "It's not like that, Your Honor." "No," Wilson's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Well, perhaps it should be. Life out here is too short and too hard to ignore the good things when they present themselves." He clapped Samuel on the shoulder. "Just some unsolicited advice from an old man who's seen too many regrets in his courtroom." With that parting wisdom, the judge and his men rode back toward town, leaving Samuel and Beatrice standing side by side on the porch. "So," Beatrice said after a moment, "it seems you're staying." "If that's all right with you," Samuel replied. "Just until we're certain Hargrove has moved on to other schemes." Beatrice turned to face him fully. "And if I said it was more than all right, that perhaps I'd like you to stay beyond that." The directness of her question caught him by surprise, but Samuel found himself admiring her forthright nature all the more for it. "Then I'd say we should probably head back to that cottonwood tree," he answered with a smile. "I believe you owe me some space for my initials." As the afternoon sun bathed the land in golden light, they walked together to the old tree that had unwittingly brought them together just one day earlier, though it already felt like they'd known each other much longer. Beatrice handed Samuel her knife, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Show me what you can do, Mr. Reeves." He weighed the knife in his hand, then studied the bark where her initials were already carved. With careful precision, he began to etch his own SR beside hers. "Not bad," Beatrice observed as he worked. "Where did you learn to carve?" "My grandfather taught me," Samuel replied, his hands steady as he deepened the lines of the R. "He said a man should leave his mark on the world but do it with care and purpose." When he finished, they stood back to admire their combined initials in the ancient bark, BM and SR. Side by side, the fresh cuts pale against the weathered trunk. "What do you think your grandfather would say about this particular mark?" Beatrice asked, a hint of teasing in her voice. Samuel's gaze shifted from the tree to her face, taking in the way the sunlight caught the auburn highlights in her hair and the quiet strength in her eyes. "I think he'd say I'm finally showing some wisdom," he replied softly. Beatrice's smile in that moment promised something neither of them had been looking for, but both now recognized they might have found. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: Hargrove's schemes, the ongoing struggle to make the ranch prosper, the ghosts of their respective pasts. But today, beneath the spreading branches of the old cottonwood, they had carved the beginning of their story. And like the tree itself, it had strong roots and the promise of growth. The weeks that followed brought changes to the Montgomery homestead. With Samuel's help, long-neglected repairs were finally addressed: fence posts replaced, barn roof patched, the squeaking windmill oiled and functioning properly again. Each evening, exhausted but satisfied, they would sit on the porch watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. Beatrice found herself watching Samuel as much as the sunsets. His quiet competence, his easy way with animals, the respect with which he treated her opinions, all of it stood in stark contrast to her previous experiences with men who'd come calling after her father's death, most of whom had viewed her primarily as a woman in need of a husband to manage her affairs. Samuel, for his part, observed the determination with which Beatrice attacked each day's challenges. She never complained about the hard work, rising before dawn to milk the cow and feed the chickens, mending clothes by lamplight long after the day's labor should have ended. Her resilience impressed him as much as her occasional flashes of humor delighted him. One evening, nearly a month after his arrival, they sat shelling peas on the porch, the comfortable silence between them broken only by the rhythmic sounds of their work and the distant lowing of cattle. "Hargrove's been quiet," Beatrice remarked, dropping a handful of peas into the bowl between them. "Too quiet," Samuel agreed. "Sheriff Donnelly mentioned he's been meeting with men from out of the territory. I don't trust it," Beatrice sighed. "Neither do I." "But we can't live waiting for the next attack." Samuel's hands stilled. "No, we can't." He seemed to wrestle with something before continuing. "Beatrice, I've been thinking about the future." Her heart quickened, but she kept her voice casual. "Have you now?" "This place has potential," he said, gesturing toward the fields beyond the house. "The southern pasture could support twice the cattle you're running now. With some investment and work, you could turn a real profit by next season." Though his assessment was accurate, Beatrice felt a stab of disappointment. She'd thought perhaps he was leading toward something more personal. "That would require capital I don't have," she pointed out, returning her attention to the peas. "I've been saving most of what I earned these past years," Samuel replied. "Not much to spend money on when you're moving from job to job." He cleared his throat. "I'd be willing to invest in the ranch as a partner." Beatrice looked up sharply. "A business partner?" Samuel met her gaze, something unspoken flickering in his eyes. For now, though I'd hope, in time, the implications hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to give them voice. "I'll consider it," Beatrice finally said, her voice softer than she'd intended. Samuel nodded, seemingly content with that answer for the moment. They returned to their task, but something had shifted. A possibility had been acknowledged, even if not yet embraced. The next morning, as Beatrice needed dough for the day's bread, a rider approached at a gallop. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch, shading her eyes against the morning sun. It was Charlie, the blacksmith's son, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Miss Montgomery," he called, pulling up in a cloud of dust. "Pa sent me to warn you." Hargrove's gathered a bunch of men, not just his usual hired guns. "They're talking about burning out troublemakers tonight." Samuel emerged from the barn, alerted by the commotion. "Easy, Charlie. Start from the beginning." The boy gulped air, his young face flushed with exertion and excitement. "Pa overheard them planning at the saloon last night. Hargrove's brought in men from Montana Territory, real hard cases. They're hitting 3 ranches tonight that have been standing against him. Yours is on the list." Beatrice and Samuel exchanged grim looks. "The judge?" Samuel asked. Charlie shook his head. "Rode out to Cheyenne 2 days ago for court business. Sheriffs deputized some men, but they can't watch all the threatened ranches at once." "How many men with Hargrove?" Samuel asked, his mind already calculating. 15, maybe 20, Charlie replied. "Pa said to tell you they'll try to help, but most folks in town are scared to cross Hargrove now that he's brought in these gunmen." Beatrice squared her shoulders. "Thank your father for the warning, Charlie. You'd best get home now and be careful." After the boy had ridden off, Beatrice turned to Samuel, determination hardening her features. "I won't be driven from my home." "No," Samuel agreed, his voice steady. "You won't be." He surveyed the property with a tactical eye. "We need to prepare, and we need help." Throughout the day, they worked feverishly to strengthen their defenses. Samuel rode to the neighboring Jenkins farm, returning with Tom Jenkins and his 2 grown sons, all armed and willing to stand with them against Hargrove's men. The blacksmith and 3 other townsmen arrived by mid-afternoon, bringing extra ammunition and grim determination. "Never did like Hargrove," the blacksmith, a burly man named Peterson, declared as they positioned themselves around the property. "Man tried to cheat me on horseshoes last spring. Figured that was just the tip of his dishonesty." By sunset, 9 defenders had established positions around the Montgomery homestead. Samuel directed their preparations with the calm efficiency of someone who had faced such situations before. placing men where they could cover the most likely approaches and establishing signals for communication. Beatrice moved among them, providing water and food, her rifle never far from her reach. When she found Samuel checking the ammunition in his Winchester for the third time, she touched his arm gently. "You don't have to stay," she said quietly. "This isn't your fight." Samuel looked at her, surprise evident in his expression. "Of course it is. Because of your former employer in Denver?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "No, Beatrice, because of you." The simple declaration hung between them, more powerful than any flowery profession might have been. Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Samuel, if anything happens tonight, it won't," he interrupted firmly. "But if you're about to say something important, perhaps it should wait until we can properly celebrate it." A smile tugged at her lips despite the tension of the moment. "Always so confident, Mr. Reeves." "Only about things that matter," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. The moment was interrupted by a low whistle from Tom Jenkins, their lookout on the north side. Samuel squeezed Beatrice's hand once, then moved swiftly to investigate. Dusk had fallen, painting the landscape in deepening shades of blue and purple. In the distance, a line of riders emerged from the trees bordering the creek, moving slowly but purposefully toward the homestead. "Right on time," Samuel murmured, counting at least 15 men in the approaching group. "Positions, everyone. Remember, hold your fire until they make the first move. We want witnesses to know who started this." Beatrice took her place at an upstairs window, her father's rifle steady in her hands. Below, she could see Samuel directing the other men with hand signals, spreading them out to create the impression of greater numbers. The riders halted just beyond effective rifle range. In the fading light, Hargrove's bulky silhouette was unmistakable at the front of the group. "Montgomery," he shouted, "this is your final chance. Clear out now and you can leave with your personal belongings." Samuel stepped forward from the shadow of the barn, deliberately making himself visible. "Evening, Hargrove. Bit late for a social call, isn't it?" Hargrove's surprise at Samuel's presence was evident even at a distance. "Reeves, still playing hero to the widow, I see." "Miss Montgomery isn't a widow," Samuel called back, "and I'm just one of several citizens who take exception to your business methods." This revelation clearly unsettled Hargrove, who conferred briefly with the men beside him. "You're bluffing," he finally shouted. "We know the sheriff can't spare men to babysit this worthless piece of land." In response, the blacksmith and Jenkins men revealed themselves at strategic points around the property, rifles clearly visible. "No law here tonight, Hargrove," Samuel acknowledged. "Just neighbors standing together against a threat to one of their own." Murmurs ran through Hargrove's group. Several of his hired guns shifted uncomfortably in their saddles, clearly having expected an easy target rather than an organized defense. "This changes nothing," Hargrove declared, though with less conviction than before. "The Montgomery place will be mine one way or another." "Not tonight it won't," Samuel replied evenly, "and not ever if the lady has anything to say about it." As if on cue, Beatrice fired a single shot into the air from her window. The sharp crack echoed across the darkening landscape, a clear statement of her resolve. Tension crackled in the night air as both sides waited for the other to make a move. Hargrove's men looked increasingly uncertain, several casting glances toward the darkened hills as if suspecting more defenders might be hidden there. Finally, one of the Montana gunmen leaned toward Hargrove. Though his words couldn't be heard, his gestures suggested he was questioning the wisdom of their position. After a heated exchange, Hargrove turned back toward the homestead. "This isn't over, Montgomery," he shouted, his voice tight with fury. "Accidents happen on isolated ranches. Fires start. People disappear. You can't stay vigilant forever." "Neither can you, Hargrove," Samuel called back. "And threatening a lady in front of witnesses isn't the smartest move for a man already under investigation by territorial authorities." With a final curse, Hargrove yanked his horse around and spurred it away. His men followed, some more reluctantly than others, until they disappeared into the gathering darkness. No one at the Montgomery homestead celebrated immediately. They maintained their positions for hours, watching for any sign of a return or sneak attack. Only when the moon had risen high and bright did Samuel finally signal an all clear. The defenders gathered in Beatrice's kitchen, the atmosphere tense but relieved. Peterson, the blacksmith, slapped Samuel on the back. "Quick thinking, mentioning witnesses and territorial authorities," he said approvingly. "Saw a couple of those hired guns lose their enthusiasm right quick at that." Samuel accepted a cup of coffee from Beatrice with a tired smile. Men like that calculate risks. Once they realized this wouldn't be easy, the math changed. "Will they be back?" Tom Jenkins asked, voicing everyone's concern. "Not tonight," Samuel replied, "but Hargrove isn't a man who forgets a grudge." The men departed in pairs for safety, promising to spread word of the confrontation throughout the community. Peterson was the last to leave, pausing at the door to address Beatrice. "You should know, Miss Montgomery, that folks in town are talking about you and Mr. Reeves here." His weathered face creased in a knowing smile. "Most are saying it's about time someone worthy caught your eye." After the door closed behind him, Beatrice and Samuel were left alone in the kitchen, the lamp casting warm light over the worn table between them. The events of the day, the frantic preparations, the tense standoff, the lingering uncertainty about what tomorrow might bring seemed to hang in the air along with unspoken words. "They'll talk more now," Beatrice finally said, gathering empty cups. "A single woman with a man staying on her property." "Does that concern you?" Samuel asked, watching her movements. Beatrice set the cups in the wash basin with deliberate care. "I've never much cared for gossip, but I do care about the truth." "And what truth is that?" She turned to face him, her expression open and vulnerable in a way it rarely was. "That I don't want you to stay because of Hargrove, or because the ranch needs help, or because you feel obligated after tonight." Samuel rose from his chair and moved toward her, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Why do you want me to stay, Beatrice?" he asked softly. The directness of his question made her breath catch, but she met his gaze steadily. "Because when I look at you, I see a future I never allowed myself to imagine. Because you make me laugh when I'd forgotten how. Because—" She hesitated, then finished in a rush. "Because I think I'm falling in love with you, Samuel Reeves, and it terrifies me almost as much as it exhilarates me." For a moment, Samuel remained perfectly still, his blue eyes searching hers. Then, with infinite gentleness, he reached up to touch her cheek. "I knew at the moment I saw you carving that tree," he confessed. "There was something about your determination, your quiet strength. I told myself it was foolish to feel so drawn to a stranger, but every day since has only confirmed what my heart recognized immediately." Beatrice leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "And what was that?" "That you are the home I've been searching for," Samuel replied, his voice husky with emotion. "That our initials belong side by side, not just on that tree, but in life." When he finally kissed her, it felt like the culmination of a journey that had begun the moment their paths crossed beneath the cottonwood's branches. His lips were warm and certain against hers, his arms strong as they drew her close. Outside, the Wyoming night spread its star-scattered canopy over the land they both now fought to protect. Whatever Hargrove might plan next, whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, their story just beginning to unfold. The following weeks brought significant changes to the territory around Laramie. Word of the standoff at the Montgomery homestead spread quickly, inspiring other small ranchers and homesteaders to band together against Hargrove's intimidation tactics. When Judge Wilson returned from Cheyenne, he found himself presiding over multiple complaints against the would-be land baron. For Beatrice and Samuel, however, these larger events formed merely the backdrop to their own unfolding story. After the night of the confrontation, something had shifted between them, hesitation giving way to certainty, caution to commitment. They worked side by side during the days, their partnership extending to every aspect of ranch operations. Samuel's suggestions about expanding the cattle herd proved sound, and with his savings invested in the property, they purchased additional stock from a rancher heading back east. Beatrice's knowledge of the land which pastures greened first in spring, where the best water could be found during dry spells, complemented Samuel's experience with cattle management. In the evenings, they would often return to the cottonwood tree, sitting beneath its spreading branches as the sunset painted the sky. It was during one such evening, nearly 2 months after their first meeting, that Samuel reached for Beatrice's hand as they watched the stars emerge above them. "I've been thinking," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Beatrice smiled. "A dangerous pastime, Mr. Reeves." "Indeed," he agreed with a chuckle. "Particularly when my thoughts involve a certain stubborn, beautiful rancher who's captured my heart entirely." Beatrice's breath caught at the open affection in his voice. Though they had acknowledged their feelings for each other, neither had spoken so directly of love since the night of Hargrove's failed attack. "And what conclusions have these dangerous thoughts led you to?" she asked, her voice softer than intended. Samuel shifted to face her fully, his expression serious yet tender in the fading light. "That life is uncertain and often shorter than we expect. That happiness should be seized when found." He squeezed her hand gently. "That I can no longer imagine my future without you in it." Beatrice felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but they were born of joy rather than sorrow. "Samuel, I'm not a wealthy man," he continued. "I can't offer you fine things or an easy life. But I can promise you my heart, my hands, and my absolute devotion for as long as I draw breath." From his pocket, he withdrew a simple band of silver, holding it between them. "Beatrice Montgomery, will you marry me?" For a moment, Beatrice could only stare at the ring glinting in the last rays of sunlight, not because she had any doubt about her answer, but because the fullness of her heart made speech impossible. Finally, she found her voice. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Samuel. I will marry you." His smile outshone the emerging stars as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always belonged there. "It was my mother's," he explained. "One of the few things I kept when I lost the Nebraska ranch. She made me promise I'd only give it to someone truly special." Beatrice examined the simple band with its delicate engraving of intertwined leaves. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely, "and I'm honored to wear it." Samuel drew her close, his kiss conveying everything words could not: the promise of their future, the certainty of their bond, the depth of his love. When they finally parted, Beatrice rested her forehead against his. "When?" she asked simply. "As soon as possible," Samuel replied with a smile. "Unless you'd prefer a long engagement," Beatrice laughed. "At the risk of appearing overeager, Mr. Reeves, I see no reason to wait. We could ride into town tomorrow, speak with Reverend Collins." "Tomorrow it is," Samuel agreed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Though we should probably inform our friends as well. I suspect Peterson the blacksmith would never forgive us if he didn't get to witness the culmination of what he so clearly saw developing." The wedding took place 2 weeks later on a crisp autumn morning. The small church in Laramie overflowed with well-wishers, neighboring ranchers, townspeople who had stood with them against Hargrove, even Judge Wilson himself, who had delayed his circuit to attend. Beatrice wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved all these years. The ivory silk had yellowed slightly with age, but it suited her perfectly, the simple lines emphasizing her natural grace. She carried wildflowers gathered that morning from the meadow near the cottonwood tree. Samuel waited at the altar in a new suit, his normally tanned face slightly pale with nerves, until the moment Beatrice appeared at the church door. The love that transformed his expression then brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic ranchers present. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, their vows exchanged with clear voices and unwavering certainty. When Reverend Collins pronounced them husband and wife, The cheer that went up from the congregation seemed to lift the very roof of the small church. The celebration afterwards spilled out onto the town square, with tables laden with food contributed by every household for miles around. Music from fiddles and a battered piano created an impromptu dance floor where couples twirled beneath paper lanterns hung from the oak trees. As the festivities continued into evening, Judge Wilson approached the newlyweds, a glass of whiskey in one hand and an official-looking envelope in the other. "A wedding gift," he explained, handing the envelope to Samuel. "Of sorts." Inside was a court order permanently dismissing Hargrove's claims against the Montgomery Reeves property, along with notification that Hargrove himself had been indicted on multiple counts of fraud and intimidation. "He fled the territory last week," Wilson added with satisfaction. "Word is he's headed for California, hopefully wiser about attempting his schemes where people stand together." "Thank you, Your Honor," Samuel said sincerely, shaking the older man's hand. "This means more than you know." "Oh, I think I have some idea," Wilson replied with a wink toward Beatrice. "Building a life together is challenge enough without such clouds hanging over you." He raised his glass. "To new beginnings." As the judge moved away to join other guests, Samuel turned to his bride, drawing her close amidst the celebration swirling around them. "Happy, Mrs. Reeves?" he asked softly. Beatrice's smile held all the warmth of the summer they had shared and all the promise of the seasons to come. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied. "And you?" "I'm exactly where I'm meant to be," Samuel said, his gaze taking in the community that had become their extended family, the land that was their legacy, and finally returning to the woman who had captured his heart with a knife and a tree. Home at last. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys to the Montgomery Reeves ranch. The harsh Wyoming winters tested their resilience, while spring's renewal always seemed to arrive just when their spirits needed it most. Their cattle herd grew steadily, along with their reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. Word of Hargrove's conviction in a California court for similar schemes reached them eventually, bringing final closure to that chapter of their lives. The cottonwood tree where they had first met continued to stand sentinel at the edge of their property, its bark now bearing not just their initials, but the dates of significant moments in their shared life. 18 months after their wedding, Beatrice gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Elizabeth, after both their mothers. The little girl inherited her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit, toddling after them both as they went about their daily tasks, insisting on helping even before she could properly hold a tool. On Sarah's 3rd birthday, as summer heat shimmered across the pastures, Beatrice found Samuel sitting on the porch swing he had built the previous winter, watching their daughter chase butterflies in the front yard. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, settling beside him with a glass of lemonade. Samuel accepted the glass with a grateful smile. "Just counting my blessings," he replied, his gaze soft as it moved from Sarah to Beatrice. "And thinking how different my life might have been if I hadn't stopped that day when I saw a beautiful woman carving her initials into a tree." Beatrice leaned against his shoulder, content in the life they had built together. "I was saying goodbye, you know," she admitted. "That day at the tree, I thought I would have to leave the ranch that I couldn't hold on by myself." "And now?" Samuel asked, his arms slipping around her waist. Beatrice looked out at their thriving ranch, the repaired barn with its fresh coat of red paint, the expanded cattle pens, the vegetable garden bursting with summer bounty, then back to their daughter's joyful exploration of the world. "Now I know that some goodbyes are really just beginnings in disguise," she replied. "That day I was carving what I thought was an ending, but when you asked me to make room for your initials beside mine, we carved our future instead," Samuel finished for her, drawing her closer for a kiss that still held all the promise of that first day beneath the cottonwood's branches. As twilight softened the landscape around them, Sarah ran to the porch, her small hands filled with wildflowers and her face alight with discovery. Scooping her up between them, Samuel and Beatrice shared a look of perfect understanding. This was what they had fought for, worked for, loved for. This was home. And like their initials in the ancient bark of the cottonwood tree, their story would endure, weathering seasons of change, growing deeper with time, standing strong against whatever storms might come, their roots intertwined beneath the vast Wyoming sky.